So I was just listening to a podcast the other day, and this struck me. Uh, Long ago, several thousands of years ago, in Greece, the emperor of Greece suddenly had a doubt that his crown was not made of pure gold, and he didn't know how to test it. So he thought the best way is to give it to the world famous mathematician in his empire, in his kingdom. And he gave it to him and he said, we want you to certify this gold for me, and you have to satisfy me about whether this is pure gold or not. And in those days, there was no way to test it. And he was wondering how this mathematician is going to do it. But somehow he had faith in him. The mathematician also had no clue about how to test the purity of the gold. So he kept pondering, he kept thinking all through the night. He was so exhausted, but he had to give the emperor an answer. Otherwise, his head would roll. So he thought, okay, let me take a bath. Probably I would find some answer. At least it will wake me up from my sleep, and I will be able to think better. So he filled his bathtub to the brim, and the moment he went into the bathtub, water got displaced. And immediately an idea struck to him that the amount of water that is getting displaced is equal to the volume of his body, right? And apparently, he immediately jumped out of the bathtub and ran through the city where he lived in, completely naked, shouting, Eureka, Eureka. Eureka is the Greek word which means I found it, right? And this was a story of Archimedes, and this is how the Archimedes principle was taught to us in school. All of us believed this story, isn't it? We all have read Archimedes Principle. Eureka is not an unknown word for us. And we know the story about Archimedes running naked from the bathtub and shouting, Eureka, Eureka. And we all have believed this story. But do you know something? This story was written 200 years after Archimedes died. And we don't really know whether this actually happened. But the story has remained in our minds so strongly that the Archimedes principle is one of those theories which none of us have ever forgotten from school days. This is a great example of how storytelling drives home a concept. Right? Now, this is a direct story about the person on whom the philosophy principle is based, and this is a direct story which is you're actually imagining Archimedes wondering what to do with the answer. You're imagining him jumping into the bathtub and suddenly remembering, and all of that. The whole scene comes to your mind, your memory, and Archimedes principle is something that you remember. Another example. We all have studied the Pythagoras theorem in school in geometry, right? Right angle triangle, there's a hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse, the square, the area of the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the areas of the squares on either side. That is Pythagoras theorem. I studied Pythagoras theorem in school many, many years ago. I am not a millennial, so really many years ago. And I did not study maths in my college days because I went on to pharmaceutical and health sciences. But Pythagoras theorem is something I remember. And how do I remember? So here goes. The Red Indian chieftain's wife is called a squaw. Okay? The Red Indian chieftain's wife, she weighed 100 kilograms. And she had two sons. One of them weighed 75 kilograms and the other son weighed 25 kilograms. So the Red Indian chieftain's wife, Squaw, was sitting under a tree with her sons on either side of her. What's the moral of this story? She was actually sitting on a hippopotamus. Sorry, not under a tree. She was sitting on a hippopotamus and her two sons were by her side. What's the moral of the story? The squaw on the hippopotamus has a weight which is equal to the sons of the squaw on either side. The square on the hypotenuse has an area which is equal to the area of the squares on either sides. Hypotenuse theorem, right? The Pythagoras theorem. Now, this is another kind of a story where you're not really telling anything about the real theorem. You're not giving anything factual, but you're stating a story which is so funny, which is so interesting, and it has those key words which sound very similar to the original. And you remember the Pythagoras theorem. So what does the story do to all of us? What does a story do to all of us? Now, before we go into Wonderland, let's look at the Wonderland. Okay, what does storytelling do to us? It leaves us with a vision of the entire picture. Okay, story makes us feel a part of that picture at times. How many of us really shed tears when we watch a tragedy on screen? A lot of us do. A lot of us do, and we are open about it. Many of us do, and we decide not to talk about it. But yeah, when you see a tragic scene on screen, it does churn your heart a bit. Okay. Why does that happen? Why do you start emoting what you see on the screen? Is because you feel you're part of that story. And this is the power of storytelling. In business, use this power in a very legitimate way. In business, why do you bring storytelling? Storytelling is an art or a science. It is an art because it touches emotions. It is a science because it invokes reactions from people. So what's important in story is that stories have to be told in a way that they generate a sense of discovery, a sense of delight. But when stories go wrong, they become disaster. So what one has to remember in the art of storytelling is that if you want to be Alice in Wonderland, bring your story in a way that it generates discovery and delight. But if it goes to the third D, which is disaster, then you would be Alice in Blunderland. Okay. So in business, how do you do storytelling is, remember one thing, always make your decision maker as the central part of the story. Okay. If you tell a story for the sake of telling a story, if I were to bring a story here and say that, I'm telling you a story and I tell the story first. And then I say, okay, now let me bring the subject to you. You're desperately trying to connect the story with the subject. That's your blunder number one. Never tell a story for the sake of telling a story. Practice storytelling as a tool of facilitation. Facilitation is not necessarily for a training program. You can facilitate a discussion. You can facilitate a meeting. You can facilitate a conversation. You can facilitate a dialogue between people. You can facilitate a conflict resolution, whatever. So in any of these facilitations, use storytelling as a tool, but you don't have to necessarily tell a story. Okay. When you tell a story, what you're doing is you're keeping the characters of the story as a central theme. And how do I see myself as a listener as part of that story? I don't, unless you make a very desperate attempt to make me a part of that story. That's a lot of effort. And human beings, we don't like to take that effort. But when you drive home a concept using storytelling as a tool, what you're doing is the concept is in the background, the concept is the plot. Everyone who's listening, okay, suppose you want to make a business proposal and you're presenting it to management. Everyone in management who's listening to that context, the plot, is feeling that he or she is part of that story. As your story unfolds, as you unravel character after character, each of them will sense a feeling of what is it that's going to impact me? How is my world going to look different after the story is completely unraveled? And that's when your story becomes effective for decision making. Right? So while I speak, dear friends, please keep putting your questions on. And I have some of the questions in front of me, which I am addressing during the talk, but I'll be more than happy to hear more questions from you and talk about experiences. So what's bad storytelling? In fact, that was one of the questions that I saw here. What is bad storytelling? Bad storytelling is when you tell a story to drive home a concept. Good storytelling is when you drive home a concept using a story. And how do you do storytelling is, I would say one of the worst things to do in using storytelling as a facilitation tool is, one of the worst things is if you go there prepared with a script, which you cannot change. I think that's one of the worst things that can happen in storytelling. Go with a story outline. Keep adding the characters as you're speaking, as you're hearing your audience responses. Try and make eye contact with your audience. Even in a virtual classroom or a virtual session like this, try and see what audience reactions are. You could ask them to turn on their videos. You could ask them to drop in questions, or you could have somebody, any one person who's keeping their video on. Just as I was saying this, Nihali went off video. She kind of read my mind. So when you watch your audience, you know, thanks for coming back, Nihali. When you're watching your audience, you know whether they're interested or not, right? I'm watching Nihali and I can see her expressions and I know if what I'm talking is making sense. So go with an outline, build your story looking at your audience response. If you go with your rigid story and that story is not relatable by your audience, you will find that people are not interested in the story. And the risk here in storytelling is if they're not interested in the story, if they're not able to relate to the story, they're not able to relate to your business proposal either, right? Because your purpose there is to get your proposal approved. Your purpose there is not to tell a story, right? So you have to have that engagement or connect with your audience continuously by either making eye contact or by engaging them, by asking them to drop in questions or asking a couple of people to turn on their videos. You may be able to have that comfort level with a few people and say that I want to see what you feel like. I want to gauge your attention into as I'm speaking. So would appreciate if you'd keep your videos on. Do that. But going with a very rigid script is bad storytelling, right? So telling a story to drive a concept is bad storytelling. Going with a very, very rigid script and not willing to change it is bad storytelling. Having very fixed characters is bad storytelling. Your characters should evolve. I think those of you who have heard me many times over would know that Anamika is my favorite character. How was Anamika born? Anamika was born in a webinar. I was speaking and I wanted to tell somebody, I wanted to make a point, I wanted to explain something. I said, let's think of a name. Anamika means unnamed. So I said that's the most non-controversial name. And that's how Anamika was born. And Anamika grew. I think during the pandemic, Anamika grew like a complete human being. And now she's probably going to outlive me. The character Anamika is so strong that every time I'm able to build Anamika and her other characters in her story, no matter what the topic is. And Anamika doesn't come with any preparation. She just walks into the room in the middle of a talk. At some point, Harini is bored, doesn't know what to answer. Anamika is there for the rescue, right? That's what storytelling does. Storytelling helps you to deal with situations because you put yourself also as a character in it and you can think through in a dispassionate manner, right? So we did speak about what's bad storytelling. Common mistakes which we make while telling a story is we narrate a story. Most common mistake. Never start with, let me tell you a story. Very bad, because remember, you're dealing with adults at the workplace. And we've all grown up and we say that we are grown up. Storytelling, listening to stories is not our cup of tea. It's a waste of time. We all need to be working hard at work. I'm not here to listen to your stories, my friend. So never say, let me tell you a story. That's a biggest and the most common mistake many storytellers do. If it's a bunch of young kids, definitely say, let me tell you a story, because they want to listen to stories. But when you're talking to adults, when you're talking to your management team, never start with saying, let me tell you a story. Just start with the story. Build characters into your story. Look at them and look at their body language. Make eye contact and see how your story is evolving. Let the characters evolve. Each character should be stronger than the previous one. Ensure that no character that you've introduced dies a sudden death or disappears, because you never know. There could be somebody who is already very closely associated with that character in your story. So if that character suddenly dies, that person will feel as if you have killed him or her. So never let a character disappear from your story suddenly. Some of you might remember in Connecting the Dots, one session I did along with Sahil Nair, where actually I brought in characters from well-known nursery rhymes and fairy tales. It was an absolutely unscripted conversation that the two of us did. And this being an audience which knows both of us, I thought it makes sense for me to bring it here, because it was meant to be an interview of sorts. I was actually interviewing Sahil. But on the spur of the moment, I thought, let me come up with characters from nursery rhymes and fairy tales, and let me superimpose those characters in the corporate world, and let me get his views on it. The way the conversation between the two of us, actually unraveled, there was a point of time where he said, let me introduce this character. And he brought in another character, which was not even in my mind. And, and then it caught on. So what happened is the audience were left with a lot of well-known characters through whom we drove a lot of concepts. We used storytelling there, but we did not tell anywhere that let me tell you a story. There was Jack and the Beanstalk, there was Pied Piper, there was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and God knows what. So anyone who has missed it, go back to HRAI's YouTube channel and you will see that conversation there. That was an example of how you put storytelling out there when you want to have a conversation, right? So do not say, let me tell you a story. That will be disastrous. Do not eliminate any character suddenly or abruptly. Treat every character that you bring in with due respect. That's important because you never know who in your audience is relating himself or herself to that character. Okay. How do you get the full attention of audience during your storytelling? Now, the entire control of grabbing audience attention lies in the depth of your story. Okay. Out of the 3 dimensions, everything that has 3 dimensions has great impact. Length of the story, obviously, do not make your stories very long because you have to finish your story before people realize that you're telling a story, because you're out there, like I said, to sell a business proposal or to make a business case. You're not there to tell a story. So do not make a story very long. So length of the story need not be very big. That's a very small dimension. Breadth of the story, keep it fluid, keep it flexible. Breadth in the sense, number of characters, types of characters, different personalities that you bring in. Keep it very, very flexible. You can keep on increasing as you see your audience gauging interest. You can eliminate certain characters the way you want in a very thoughtful manner. That's an important but a flexible parameter. And the third dimension of depth of the story is the most important one. If you really want to grab your audience full attention in the story that you're saying, in stories related to business, the depth of the story is important. So when you're making a business proposal, how do you bring depth into your story? Ensure that you're able to put your customer or listener at the center of the story and talk about how this proposal, if approved, is going to make a difference to their lives. That should be your storytelling or narrative. Okay, your storyline or narrative should be that. So instead of telling, for example, instead of telling your decision maker that this year, market trend is saying people are getting an average 10% hike. And therefore, for the following reasons, I want to propose a 10% hike. Okay, the person who's listening will say, you're proposing 10%, okay? But I'm not sure whether we can afford 10%. So let me keep your proposal under review. It goes under review, okay? But if you're using storytelling here, okay, what you might want to say is, we want to position ourselves, or we see ourselves next year as one of the front runners in our business. And for being a front runner in our business, our salaries must be extremely competitive so that our people are very, very happy with what we pay and they feel fair. They feel that we are fair and transparent in it. So they should look up to you, your leadership, us, all of us in the business, as somebody who makes a big difference to them. So if we have to remain there in their minds, we have to ensure that we are fair and transparent in the way we give them salary increases. When the market is giving 10% for an average performer, I think we should give our top talent a little more than what the market does, so that we are very clear about how we treat our top talent. By the way, we will average our increase to about 10%, or we may even be below that. Now here, you're telling your decision maker how his life or her life is going to be different with your proposal. I've asked for a 10% average increase. But in the first instance, I said, market is giving 10%, so let's give 10%. Management is likely to say, put the proposal on hold, we will review, we will look at our financials and we'll come back. The second instance, I'm saying, we see ourselves in a new world. And for that, we need to have, these things. We need to see our people seeing us differently. We need to see our people looking at us as an organization that cares for its people. And we really need to take care of our top talent. So if we pay our top talent a little more, we will still average out at 10. And this proposal is more likely to go through. I'm putting a disclaimer. I'm not saying that every story sells, but I'm only selling that this is how you use storytelling as a tool to drive home a concept. Here, you're driving home a concept of it is important to give our people salary increases. So, dear management, do not do chindigiri. You have to give. सीधे सीधे पूछोगे तो नहीं मिलेगा. Tell them, again, this is ethical, okay? You're absolutely ethical. You're not cooking up an unethical story. You're telling them the reality, right? But put them at the center of it. Make them the hero of your situation, of your story. They feel they're part of the story. They relate to it. They start sensing it. It's like a 7-dimensional movie. They start sensing the repercussions of taking a decision for the proposal or against the proposal. But come se kam decision making tak to lekar jaoge through a story, right? That's how you use storytelling in business proposals. So this is how you grab your attention, by making them part of your story. The main of course, don't call them characters. And another very wrong thing to do is using any of them or their names as characters. Even when Anamika was born, that day there was no Anamika in the audience. I quickly looked at all the names. There was no Anamika, and I used Anamika because you never know how your character evolves. So don't bring in real names, and they should not feel that you're talking about them. There should be no resemblance at all with anyone. That could be disastrous. So if you want to keep your story to discovery and delight, avoid anything that could become a disaster. How to become a good storyteller? Very good question. Believe me, it takes effort. Okay, it is not easy because storytelling is not natural. It's an art, and you need to be an artist to be able to perform that art. It's a science. You need to be a scientist to be able to understand that science, right? It takes effort, practice. Practice storytelling for small things. Let me tell you a secret. I am an introvert. I'm an introvert of an highest order. Anyone who has heard me in the last year and a half will not believe it. And people have come and told me that please go and do your MBTI again. You cannot be an INTJ. I am an introvert in the sense I process all information in an introverted manner. I am not very vocal in telling people everything at all times, unless I feel a strong connect with people. Now, why I got in, while I started practicing storytelling, what I realized is that when I am able to talk to people in a language that they understand, that is, when I tell them a story in a way that they understand, that they can relate to, I have a winning conversation with that individual. So when I have to make a difference to a particular transaction or a relationship, I want to make a difference to Nihali today. So I look at her, and the first thing I do is I smile. And before she says, hello, ma'am, I say, hello, Nihali, right? So I make that connect. So even if you are an introvert, try to make that connect. I go around looking at names because I know most of you. I try and say hello to everyone individually in whatever way possible. Last week when I was here, Ashish Gakre was in the audience, and Ashish and I share a birthday, and I made a reference to it. I'm trying to engage with the audience here, and that makes me a good storyteller, because the moment I make it a practice of engaging with my audience, it becomes a natural behavior in me that I'm able to engage with the audience even when I'm narrating a story or when I'm driving home a concept through a story. Right? Storytelling also requires you to learn the art of speaking slowly. If you hurry your story, everybody may not be able to think on the same speed as you are thinking. Moreover, you are thinking and you are speaking, so you will obviously be a little faster than the others. Others have to understand the character, they have to relate to the character, they have to choose characters with whom they can relate with, and they have to see themselves as that character and then follow in your story. You know, these things, of course, each of them takes a fraction of a second, but it takes time. So there is always a lag between the storyteller and the listener. So it's important that you learn to speak slowly. When I say speak slowly, it also means unravel your characters slowly. Do that as a practice. Do not rush or do not hurry. Third thing is, when you're talking about your characters or your storyline, do not go back and forth. You should be like those olden days movies where you would go screen by screen, frame by frame till the end. Don't make it like a scientific fiction movie where you suddenly go into the past and you suddenly jump into the future. You will leave your audience confused. So the best way to become a good storyteller is to practice using storytelling as a tool for conveying your messages. And how do you start your practice? Start with your most comfortable audience, your children, family members, your team with whom you are absolutely comfortable, where you're not afraid of judgment. Once storytelling becomes something that you're almost perfect with, where you don't have to search or struggle, then take it for making larger proposals. Remember, discovery, delight, but not disaster. The third aspect of disaster should not happen in your storytelling. So there's one question here which says, what are different techniques and ideas famous and expert speakers use to avoid mistakes? Uh, Believe me, anybody who is an expert today was a novice yesterday. Okay. So whoever was a novice, whoever is an expert to storyteller today would have definitely done a lot of self-critical practice. I have watched my own videos over and over again several times, each time trying to find where I disconnected with the audience. Okay. Being very self-critical is something which all expert speakers practice. People whom I really, really value for their expertise, they definitely do that. Being very self-critical, I'm sure Vinay here will definitely agree with me. He's a great speaker himself. Take feedback from people whom you trust. I think all expert speakers, if they are experts today, must have definitely done that. Uh, Instead of putting up a post on LinkedIn or any social media saying, I was happy to do this talk in that place, say something about what you spoke over there. Try and add value. That's what experts do. People who are wannabes, who want to be visible, are the ones who typically say, I was invited to this place and I did this talk. But people who are experts, the expert speakers, would add a flavor of their message when they are talking about it so that others see value in it. And when others see value in it and they comment, it actually improves your storytelling style. So the more you see people seeing value in what you're speaking, it adds to the value that you're providing back. So value builds value. Remember that. And that's what expert speakers do. Practice the art of storytelling, speak slowly, add value. Vinay says, when you're asking for feedback, ask for one positive and at least one thing that could be an area of improvement. Absolutely. Ask for critical feedback. Do not ask for, did you like it? Ask for, I want you to, you are an important person. I want you to evaluate and tell me what is it that was good and what I could have done better. Ask for, solicit critical feedback can also be a self-critic. I have been doing that. I have one or two people with whom, we keep doing it for each other, right? Storytelling is an art. Sometimes when delivered, if found abstract without giving the feel of seriousness and professionalism, it can be devastating. What are your views and comments? Yes. So storytelling, if you are rambling away with a story, it is disaster because the listener would feel that you're wasting that person's time. You're absolutely right. Whoever asked this question, storytelling can sometimes look like it is not professional. Therefore, decide whether you want to use storytelling as a tool for that particular situation or not. Sometimes you may choose not to. It is not necessary that once a storyteller, always a storyteller. ऐसा नहीं होता. Once a soldier, always a soldier होता है. But once a storyteller need not be a storyteller always. You have to be choosy about which are those situations where you want to tell a story. Sometimes there could be disasters, so do not. And it is seen as unprofessional if your story sounds like a story. Definitely. But it is definitely seen as professional if your story is something which opens up the future to your decision maker or to your audience. Okay. So that therefore, if you start with, let me tell you a story, you're making it sound like a story. And then they would say, this is not professional. But if you start with saying, I'm here to see a bright future for the organization along with you. And here are some interesting things that I saw. And I thought, let me share it with you so that we become a part of that big picture. This is storytelling as a tool. I'm not telling a story. but I'm using storytelling as a tool, right? So if you do this, it's professional, very much professional. It's not seen as unprofessional at all. Is there any standard length that needs to be maintained when you decide on a story? What's the ideal length? You cannot measure the length, but definitely in the 3 dimensions, length, breadth, and depth, the minimum importance is of length. So keep your story very short, just enough to convey the message, but keep the breadth flexible. Keep adding characters, keep eliminating characters in a logical and an inabrupt manner, and keep the depth of the story is more important than even the length. So focus on the depth of the story, which means you have to be very prepared with facts and figures. You have to be very prepared with consequences. You have to be very prepared, anticipating questions that will come on what our future will look like and all of that, right? So make a mental set of FAQs, listening to your story. What is your audience likely to ask? And when those questions come up, you should be able to make those answers. Length is the least important factor. So do not focus on the length of the story. Focus a lot on the depth and keep the breadth flexible. I think there are a few more questions that have come in the chat box. So let's start taking a look at them. Riddhi is asking how to share data in storytelling format. So Riddhi, data in storytelling format, I think you got it after I gave the salary proposal example. That's what it is. So your data will not be part of the story, but the consequence of the data, what is the new world that your decision maker is seeing himself or herself, that will be your storyline. And when you're generated enough curiosity, you can talk about the data in a normal manner. The data need not be part of the story because data sometimes cannot be fitted into the story. Yeah, thanks, Tushar. How we put the matter makes a difference. Absolutely. So Neha's question is, if we realize during the story that we are going on a wrong track in conveying our message, how can we shift and take it to the right track without portraying our deficiencies and weaknesses? Neha, this is what requires practice. Practice for 2 things. One is to understand that we are going on the wrong track. Here right now, because I can only see Nihali, I'm purely looking at her and trying to see if I'm on the right track. But the moment she gets disengaged, the moment she gets bored, I will think I'm on the wrong track. So one is understand the verbal and non-verbal cues when people are getting disengaged. When you're in a live room, make eye contact with everyone. The moment you find somebody disengaged, bring up that character with whom that person is most likely to relate with. Suddenly make that character active in your story, and you will find that person putting away things and listening to you when the favorite character comes into play. So that's how you have to come back to track without portraying your deficiency or weakness, because you cannot afford to show that your story is failing, right? It's a matter of pride for each one of us that our stories work, and therefore do not reveal or do not make an abrupt or awkward pause in the middle. Bring up favorite characters of the person who's getting disengaged, and therefore storytelling, you need to practice it. You need to know your audience also well. Over a period of time, you will realize what is it that excites each individual in that decision making team. So my entire focus is on storytelling in the context of business proposals. So, this person will get completely disengaged when I bring characters like this. So let those characters go into the background for a while, bring in new characters. And therefore, you have to be very, very agile in keeping your characters, your narrative very flexible and bringing it back into context. Yes, Vinay's suggestion on feedback is taken. What else? Also, Vinay is saying that when you're passionate about what you say, people will see through your vision and intent through your story. Absolutely bang on. And thanks for bringing that, Vinay. That's what is authentic storytelling. So even when I talk of Anamika, most of the times, more often than not, a lot of Anamika stories are from real experiences. It's either my own experience or a team member's experience or a friend's experience or an experience that I've read about. But more often than not, almost all of them, I would say, are real experiences. So when you're talking of real experiences or real observations that you've seen in people, you're able to answer any question around that. So that's again very important. So keep your stories authentic. Do not bring the Jataka tales or the Panchatantra or Aesop fables if you're not able to relate with each character. Sometimes we can do that, but you have to be able to relate it with the context and with each character, because authentic storytelling is very, very important. You cannot have stories which are not authentic. And I'll tell you, how authenticity is important. We all have watched magic shows, right? I'll tell you how the human brain functions when you are, I mean, the response of the human brain when you're looking at something and when you're listening to something. When you're watching a magic show, you suddenly you see something disappearing or something appearing. Okay? Typical magic trick. And your first response to that is, wow, that's amazing. Because you don't know the logic behind it. Right? The moment a magician teaches you what goes behind that trick, suddenly your brain feels very disappointed. Your brain feels cheated. Okay, say, Asha, that was a trick. So you tricked me, right? So be very, very careful of that. If you're getting too much into delight to the extent of ecstasy in your story, and if you're saying something which is impracticable and which is not realistic, the moment the person realizes it is not realistic, there's going to be a very deep disappointment, and that's going to be the disaster. So delight has to be only to the extent of delight and not euphoria. Do not bring a wow factor into storytelling. Bring a wow factor into your idea. But when you're selling your idea to management using storytelling, do not bring a wow factor into it. Do not take the person to a euphoric state of inauthenticity that suddenly when you're answering questions on practicality, the person will plummet down into disaster and disappointment. And once your decision maker is plummeted into disappointment, हो गया, फिर decision का कुछ नतीजा नहीं निकलेगा. So remember that wow moment in generating your ideas, but just a moment of delight when you're selling your ideas. You don't need to have a wow moment when you're selling your ideas to get a decision, right? Deepa wants to know a sample conversation of storytelling. Deepa, would you want to unmute yourself? We can have a conversation. Is Deepa still there? Do we have Deepa? Okay, while if Deepa is there, while she comes, let me read what Parvati has to say. Story becomes very fixed in your memory because in your
Yeah,
younger
Harini,
days,
sorry,
grandparents
I'm
used to
here.
say, yeah, Deepa. So let's have a conversation using storytelling as a tool. So how do you want to do that? You can play.
Sorry, actually, I'm really new to this concept, so that's why I'm
Hmm,
attending this. So I
hmm.
just want to know. I think I attended your last one Vadodara
Yes, you did.
session was there. Yeah,
Yes, you
so that
did.
there also I attended, but actually I'm really new to this concept, so I really
Hmm,
want to know and learn this.
hmm, hmm.
So,
So
like,
Deepa, okay. So Deepa, so what is it that really excites you? Anything. What
uh,
is it that excites you?
anything which is genuine, or the somebody is really very genuine kind of
So
behavior, or a very
authenticity
happy
excites you.
person. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Authenticity excites you. So,
yeah,
you've heard Anamika stories, right? So,
yeah.
you've heard my Anamika stories. Anamika as an HR manager. Have you heard Anamika stories of mine?
No.
Okay, so Anamika is a very is an HR manager who has a lot of aspirations, and
Okay.
she wants to keep learning new things. So she attends several forums like this, many a times along with me, sometimes hiding, sometimes even before me. And what Anamika does is that she asks a lot of questions, and she gets into the depth of matters, and she tries to connect with the speaker. Okay, so even after the sessions are over, she makes it a point to stay connected with the speaker, and she tries to understand a lot of things. And over a period of time, Anamika has increased her network so much that a lot of people know Anamika.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I just now did, Deepa? I had a
Yeah.
conversation with you uh,
Mm.
because I see you as someone who believes who believes in authenticity, who believes in
Yeah.
something which is realistic. And if you're trying to learn a new skill of storytelling, you are someone who's very keen on how to understand storytelling. So I just gave you a solution to what you have to do next through a story of
Yeah,
Anamika.
yeah, I started
Okay?
concentrating on you. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you are following what Anamika did to learn a new
Mm.
skill. Now, in your
Mm-hmm.
subconscious mind, that is going to remain
Mm.
fixated as this is the
Okay.
way I learn a new skill. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I have Dr. Vemuri here, who's another good friend, and not just a friend, he's a critic. There are lots of time when he tells me what did not go well. So I always look up to him. So Professor Vemuri, so with him, I've had WhatsApp conversations, but those conversations, if you see, will have a lot of other characters. I would put some random status on WhatsApp, and he would ask me questions around why. Okay. And I would unravel characters which would convince him sometimes, and he would say, okay, then I agree with you. There are times when he wouldn't agree with some of the comments that I make, but I would bring in characters which would give him a sense that there is a reason why I have put that, and then he would agree with me, right? So we've had numerous conversations like that. So try and understand what is it that your audience is seeking, what is it that your audience wants, build your conversation on it, and give them a solution through that conversation. That is storytelling in conversation. You don't even have to have a story.
Yeah, I got it. And you're absolutely right. This is like you have to consciously learn this for your work or personal or professional this thing, so that more people starts listening to you and hear from you for your solutions. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to have you here, Deepa, once again.
Yeah.
So Peter is asking, can activities help if linked with storytelling? What can engage participants? Now, it depends on your participants, okay, and what the context or what the situation is. Pedagogy of any facilitation program or any talk or any lecture, whatever, what pedagogy you use has to be decided very carefully. For a management, when you're selling a business proposal, which is what I was trying to focus on most of the time in the last 45 minutes, you cannot have activities, obviously, because management is not there to play games, right? So they're not, while they play games, they're not there to play games in the game that we are talking about. But when you're doing, let's say, a team building session and you're weaving stories through it, you can have activities. You can have role play. Role play works very, very well. Many a time I do a day-long story when I have to convene a day-long conference on a theme. Let's say once I was convening a full day conference on the theme around organizational development by another forum. And there were multiple speakers and there were a couple of panel discussions, and I was a convener for the whole day. Throughout the day, I had one character which was common. And every time I would introduce a speaker on the stage, I would say something that would be related between that character and the speaker. So that character remained like a mascot in people's minds. And when I got the panel, I got them to play a small game or an activity along with the participants so that everybody felt engaged, because that was soon after lunch. So you can play activities as part of your story, but what people take away out of those activities should be very, very relatable to the problem statement to which they're seeking solution. If you're doing an activity for an activity's sake, it doesn't work. For example, if you're playing blind man's buff, okay, blindfolding or whatever, and you're relating it to a concept of trust in the organization, and you're doing this to a very mature audience, they're going to immediately come and tell you, ye sab game theek hai, but in the office, it won't work. So be very careful about what activities you choose for which audience. Anything and everything will not fit for everyone and anyone. And when you're selling business proposals, serious business proposals, obviously activities won't work. Ritesh, hi Ritesh, good to see you again. Example where story fell flat or went wrong, and what can be done to come out of the situation? Yes, I have many examples. When I was practicing the art of storytelling long, long ago, I used to always start with, let me tell you a story. And believe me, there have been people who laughed at me saying, HR sirf storytelling karta hai. It became a jargon over there. So I did fall flat when I used to say that, let me tell you a story. And I think the best way is the moment like when I said, the moment you have a critical feedback about what can be improved, start working on it. While you're telling the story, if you really want to, cover up and come back, cut your story short and come straight to the point. If you feel that the story is inviting a lot of disaster moments, cut your story back and come back to your natural style. So that's where you have to be very, very flexible. You have to be agile. You have to watch what your audience wants, and you have to be able to recover quickly. So agility is required for recovering quickly. So I think you're done with all the questions that I saw in the chat box. Okay, Sadaf Rizvi has a question. Can I teach students any topic with a story? Like maybe letter writing? How can I incorporate? Sadaf, I'll give you an example. this is an extreme example of how storytelling was used. And I'm sure Deepa would remember this if she attended the other talk of mine. My mother was a biology and English teacher. Okay. So she taught me both biology and English in school. And because she was an English teacher as well, storytelling was her natural style. So she came into the class one day and we were all very bored. We were not interested in learning about leaves. We learned about the simple leaf and we knew she's going to teach about compound leaf. But my mother was very clear that she didn't want anyone to make mistakes, saying that, a compound leaf, each of those tiny things are not leaves, but they are leaflets. And in the biology paper, if you call them as leaves, you will lose marks. And my mother was very clear about her students getting it right. So how does she drive home this concept is, so what she said is, she said, one day God was sitting feeling bored. He took up one big leaf. He took a pair of scissors and along the veins and the veinlets, he made small cuts and he called them leaflets. And what was left in his hand after he finished cutting along the veins was a big compound leaf with hundreds of leaflets. So this is teaching a concept of compound leaf, and the compound leaf has a main vein and veinlets, and there are leaflets around those veinlets. This is how she taught, and that's how biology was also taught using storytelling. Okay, she was a teacher of English. Letter writing, how she taught is, she wouldn't tell us that this is the context and you have to write a letter. She wouldn't tell us that write a letter to the postmaster of your town. So she would tell us that this is a situation that happened and you want your postmaster to know that the letterbox in your colony is overflowing, and can he do something about it? Write a letter to the postmaster. So you're making your students visualize the whole story by putting them as part of the story. And now when the student is writing a letter, you will get the most creative letters from everyone, because everyone is imagining himself or herself in a very different manner. Everyone's capability of imagination is different. Somebody can imagine, I can imagine myself as a princess. I can imagine myself as a soldier. So depending on what my imaginations, my story will be different, and every student will be able to write it creatively. So this is something that I learned from my mom, from my mother, using storytelling. For incidentally, she was teaching English as well as biology. So I gave you two examples. You can teach science also using storytelling. Divya, I am in a corporate organization where I'm bound to learn storytelling. So I would like to know, where can I start, or any tip? Divya, very simple. Start practicing storytelling in small ways. Use storytelling in your audience where you're comfortable with, and see how your audience is taking. Do an idea validation with your audience using your stories and see how your audience is taking it. And then you will, so once you get the practice of it, you can take it to larger audiences, to audiences with more consequence and with bigger decision making that's coming. You can take your stories, but you'll have to make a start. You'll have to practice and seek feedback. Seek feedback, active feedback as well as passive feedback, which you should observe from others. You're welcome, Divya. Welcome, Ritesh, too. Do we have any more questions? Nihali, you asked a question before we admitted people. Would you like to bring that back here? I think that was a brilliant question, and I'm happy to answer that to the benefit of the audience.
Yeah, so that I was curious about like how you had started, how you thought about telling the story and including in your presentation or in your speech. Like, what was your thought about learning this particular skill?
Okay, so I am a maverick, right? So I do things a lot by my own experiments on myself, my experiences, good or bad. I'm absolutely accountable to take any experience that I see, right? So actually, what it all started, it was quite serendipitous. I am a little hard pressed on time because I tend to take up too many things on my head. So I end up taking a lot of things, and suddenly there was a point of time where I had no time to make a presentation. Okay, but Every presentation I make, I did not have the luxury to lose out on it, because that was a role I was playing. I was playing a very senior role. So I said the best way is to grab my audience attention without a PowerPoint presentation. And that's how my stories were born, where I would have all the authentic details in my mind. I would go ahead and do the best, but I would not use PowerPoint presentations. But to be very, very effective, stories were born. With every story, I started developing as a better storyteller. With every story, characters were born. Some characters became very strong. Some characters grew. The characters that made sense to the world, I want them to live. Those grew. Characters that people could not relate with got eliminated somewhere down the line. I don't even remember how, but that's how stories were born. So in my case, it was the feeling of having to win while not having time, and stories came to my rescue. And definitely, I knew that stories leave a lasting impact. So I thought, let me experiment with it, and it was a successful experiment. Vinay wants to say something, and yes, Vinay, absolutely, you can button right now. Vinay, there?
I just wanted to add one point to everybody. Uh, I mean, when we look at this whole concept as, oh, I'll have to build my story and I'll have to say something, and how do I make sure that my story is relevant? How do I make sure that my story connects with the audience? Blah, blah, blah. We will build a fort around us and discourage us to actually start telling the story. We need to understand that the whole idea of why we need to get into a storytelling mode is for better retention of information we want to share with people. And what we are essentially doing is, if there is some, say, 3 or 4 learnings that I have and I want to share, the minute I share a background story of why that learning became important, automatically people will understand what I'm trying to convey. So the intent is very critical when you tell stories. The objective, what do you want to achieve at the end of the story? I mean, what are the 2 takeaways, 3 learnings, or 2 incidents that you want to share? That is, definitely something that people should keep in mind, and start, learning by telling. Today you will tell a story in 3 sentences. Tomorrow those 3 sentences will become 4 sentences by you adding, saying that, oh, I was very tired, but I still got up and I did that. Then after 4 days, when you tell the same story, you will say that, you know what, the weather was also bad. I was very tired. I went to. So you will build. So you start telling stories, and when you'll realize over a period of 3 or 4 months, your simple 3-4 line story is a 5-minute story. So start learning by telling stories is my only suggestion that I'd like to add, Harini, for whoever else is listening.
Thanks for endorsing that, Vinay. It's all about practice, because authentic storytelling is important for discovery and delight. The moment your story slips into inauthenticity, disaster happens. And therefore, practice is the one and only way. And for practice, you have to make a start. So like Vinay said, start small. Start with a small audience with whom you're comfortable, who is non-judgmental but willing to be your critic. Start with 1 or 2 people, have conversations, use stories as a tool. Do not worry about, does it sound like a story? Doesn't matter. What is important is, are you able to connect and engage your audience, and then use it for bigger purposes? So start small and then grow big. And thanks so much, Vinay, for endorsing that point and highlighting it once again. That's all from me, and it is 3:57. So
Yes.
I have nothing more to say.
So Harini, one question, like, how do I know that my story was effective and suitable for this situation? Is there any analysis method that can help me to know?
The best way to measure whether your story was effective is, if you're using storytelling for your business proposals, if you have a track record of every proposal being accepted, approved, or if you have a track record where your business head says that, absolutely, I would have given your proposal, but we only have these constraints, then you know that your storytelling has been very effective. When you're using storytelling for your for training, for a normal typical classroom training, when you're able to see that the energy level in the classroom is very high till the end, and not just that, when you're doing a Kirkpatrick's effectiveness measurement, not just the training feedback, there is something called as a training effectiveness measurement, where people have retained what you have been taught. If your effectiveness measurement is more than 87% after 90 days of the training, you know that storytelling has been very effective in driving home those concepts. So either you can, I mean, both of these are tangible measures. Measure how many proposals of yours have got rejected, how many of yours have got approved, and how many of yours were in principle approved, but for some reason they were put on hold, and you know that your storytelling has worked. Try and see how many people are comfortable talking to you and approaching to you. If you become an approachable person, it means storytelling works in conversations. There was a question about using Deepa's question about using storytelling in conversations. See how many people are reaching out to you. If that's going on increasing, like my followers on LinkedIn increased from 500 to 8,000 in 2 years. And that's because people are comfortable in approaching me. So storytelling works. So there are so many ways in which you can measure.
I think you have already answered this question, but are there any standard ingredients to make stories super effective?
Of course, there has to be a plot, there has to be a protagonist, there has to be an introduction, and there has to be a conclusion. The conclusion has to be the beautiful picture of the future that you wish to paint. The protagonist will be typically your decision maker and or decision makers. The plot has to be the results you want to achieve. So that's exactly what a story to be, it should be. And therefore, do not kill any character abruptly. So definitely, these are the ingredients of a story. Do not bring too much drama into the workspace. That's where you will tip over the border of being professional to unprofessional. So keep the drama restricted, but there has to be a plot, there has to be a protagonist, there has to be an introduction, there has to be a conclusion, there has to be a natural elimination of characters. If at all you have to bring alive those characters which people want to hear, and then you've got a fantastic story.